Welcome everybody to our webinar on managing fatigue when living with a brain tumour. This is one of a series of webinars that we've been rolling out from our support services. We've also had webinars on managing behaviour and personality change, living with uncertainty, and also how to deal with the overwhelm. And this programme will be expanding over the weeks ahead, so please keep an eye out on our Eventbrite site. So where to begin? We normally run these as a coaching workshop, so we have been running them as face-to-face coaching workshops, which normally take 3 hours. So please be aware that this is just really an overview. It's a top-level webinar to help you understand better what it means to be fatigued, how fatigued is different from being tired, but to develop an understanding of fatigue and its impact, and to learn about strategies that can mitigate the impact of fatigue, so that you feel better resourced and better able to cope. We'd also like to introduce our fatigue resource, and obviously in the face-to-face webinars and face-to-face workshops, and even in our more interactive webinars, you also get a chance to feel a bit more like you're part of the community, because you can share some of the issues and successes and strategies that you've developed to deal with fatigue. So today you have me, I'm Helen, I'm the Director of Policy and Support for brainstrust, and also Jodie, who's our support specialist, who usually covers the Midlands, but we're in unusual times with coronavirus. So at the moment, Jodie and I are managing the support service between us. And today is a game of two halves. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what do we mean by fatigue, so you have a better understanding of fatigue, and Jodie will then take us through the second half when we're actually developing strategies and looking at really what it means to be living with fatigue. There's a lot out there at the moment about health and well-being. There's a huge amount of mindfulness apps, things like how to deal with the overwhelm. But I think the difference for our support resources is that we always make them meaningful and relevant for people who are living with a brain tumour. So you will find that, you know, the examples we use, you'll find that we ground it very much in evidence that comes from living with a brain tumour. The other thing I should say is that all of our health information goes through a very rigorous information standard process. So it means that all of our resources are co-produced with leading experts in the field, which include clinicians and researchers, and we can guarantee that it'll be clear, relevant, always evidence-based in the latest research, authoritative, accurate, readable, and accessible. And today's focus really is about simple shifts that you could do today. You know, we know you're tired. We know that it's very easy to be overwhelmed when you're fatigued. So this is just looking at maybe some very simple shifts that you could do in your daily routines, or maybe in your environment around you, which taken together can make a very big difference and help you be more accepting of your fatigue and better able to manage it. So it's making the most really of what you can do. Can we go to the next slide, Jodie? Thank you. So this is our fatigue book. It's free. You can order it online. I think you can go to the shop, or you can just email Jodie or myself, or hello@brainstrust. You'll have the contact details at the end. And then we can pop one in the post to you. So the resource really is an informative resource, and we put it together to enable people living with a brain tumour to understand what is meant by fatigue, and to self-manage fatigue that relates to brain tumours, so that you could learn a new pace of living, or take steps to mitigate the fatigue, or make the most of what you can do rather than what you can't. And the resource talks about what we mean by fatigue, the causes of fatigue, what's different about fatigue when you're living with a brain tumour, how we measure it, and how you can cope with it in different contexts. And then the second half is about building your toolkit, so that you're better able, you're in a better place to deal with fatigue. Okay, next slide. So a lot of this work has come out of, well, years really of us working with people living with a brain tumour, but also knowing that fatigue is really one of the top challenges. It's one of the top priorities for for this community. So it's based on our workshops that I've said that usually take several hours. But we've got a pretty good idea. We're pretty grounded in knowing what it is we think people want to get out of this webinar. But we're always welcome to have feedback. We'd love feedback. So if you think there's something we haven't covered, or you've got a good idea that you could share with us, then please let us know, because it's when our resources are driven by the community and are grounded in your needs, that's what makes these resources relevant and meaningful. So normally we'd ask you to think about now, or to share with us in the chat box, or through discussion, how are your lives impacted by fatigue at the moment? So if you could just take a minute just to reflect and think about, what is it that fatigue is stopping you doing? How is it preventing you from being the person that you want to be? And I've put a quote in here from a patient that shared this with us in one of our webinars. Next slide, please, Jodie. Right, so how is being fatigued different from being tired? Well, I suppose there are some really simple things you can think about. If you've had a really, really good night's sleep, you've gone to bed early, you've slept for 10 hours, and you wake up and you still feel as tired as you ever did, that's fatigue. If you get up in the morning after having a good night's sleep, you go and have a shower, and then you just have to go back to bed again because you're just tired, your body feels like it's got a lead suit on it, that is fatigue. So hopefully this slide will give you some indication. And it's not just about being tired, it impacts on a whole range of things, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I think the problem with fatigue is that we don't know what the causes are. I think what we do know is that it's multifactorial. So what this means is that there's likely to be a combination of factors that cause it. So when you're living with a brain tumour, for example, chemotherapy and radiation can cause fatigue. But there isn't much evidence to suggest that a brain tumour or it's a location in your brain alone can cause fatigue. It may be that there is just a problem in the brain that's causing fatigue. And fatigue can be associated with any brain injury, whatever the cause. So, if you've had a stroke, some sort of trauma, inflammation, or a brain tumour, that can also generate fatigue. On top of that, you've got pain, certain medications, such as anti-epileptic drugs, those can cause fatigue. Emotional side effects too of any cancer treatment. It's traumatic being diagnosed with a brain tumour. In fact, that's an understatement. But worrying, feeling anxious and depressed and having trouble sleeping, those can make fatigue even worse. So if you think you have fatigue, you should have a thorough medical evaluation to identify possible reasons for this. And sometimes addressing some of these other issues, for example, if you're in pain, so you're not sleeping well, addressing the pain, that can reduce or even eliminate fatigue. And I think too, fatigue is common after cancer and after brain injury, but people living with a brain tumour may be especially vulnerable to be fatigued. You're more likely to be treated with the medications, as I have mentioned, that have fatigue as a side effect. In addition, people who've lived through brain injury often have a lot more trouble processing a lot of information at the same time. For example, when being in a room where more than one person is talking, the social events therefore become exhausting. And you can also feel drowsy or abnormally sleepy when living with a brain tumour. Although this is related to fatigue, it should also be seen as a separate symptom, because drowsiness can be caused by the tumour leading to an increased pressure within the skull, but it also may be an effect of certain medications. Attentional fatigue too, and that comes from having to focus on behaviours that used to be second nature, such as needing to focus on informations or tasks. They were easy, but now they require greater effort and concentration, and sometimes these tasks need to be relearned, a bit like after having a stroke. And we all know, if you think back to when you were children, learning is hard. And sometimes people lose the ability to focus on several things at once. So those are the kinds of things that, you know, would make you feel fatigued, but let's look at how it impacts on our context, on who we are. It's very pervasive, fatigue, and it can impact in a variety of ways. So all of the things that enable us to be who we are, whether it's physical, social, concentrative, emotional, or spiritual. So with physical, for example, you might have reduced energy level, diminished strength or endurance, or difficulty sleeping. And with concentration, we've talked a little bit about that, an inability to understand new information or being distracted by sensory input, e.g. noise or activity, and feeling overwhelmed by daily tasks. Oh, social, which I missed out. So changes in roles or relationships. You might be carrying extra guilt because you can no longer do the things that you used to do, that were your role within the family. You might have reduced ability to perform job responsibilities at work, which is stressful. Emotional, you might have changes in mood, diminished sense of control about daily life, or fears and anxiety about the future. Those can cause fatigue because they never leave you. They're always on your radar. And then the spiritual, questioning your purpose, you know, feelings of why me. And you may be fatigued in one or two of these areas, or in all of them to different degrees. But once you understand how fatigue is impacting on who you are, on your context, that's when the real growth happens, because you can then begin to take steps to address it. So let's move to the next slide. Now, this is an interesting piece of work, and what I should have said at the beginning is there is no silver bullet to manage fatigue. The reason I want to share this slide with you is that it reflects a piece of research work that came out of Adam Brooks and Cambridge University, and it's called Concordance. So the red lines represent patients and the blue lines represent the clinicians. And prior to a consultation, this research gave patients and clinicians a questionnaire about what it was they wanted to talk about in the consultation. And when they put all of the questionnaires together and looked at the research, it doesn't really matter that well, I think you probably can if you're watching this on the screen. You can see the headings of the bar charts underneath. But the two red spikes, which are future uncertainty and fatigue, those are the things that patients and their caregivers wanted to talk about when they were in a consultation with a clinician. Now, if you look at the blue graphs, blue bar charts, there is a little cluster in the middle, which is what the clinicians wanted to talk about. So they want to talk about things like visual disorder, motor dysfunction, communication deficit, headaches and seizures. And then a bit further on, you've got leg weakness. So these are all the things that you can either write a prescription for, or you can refer on to an allied healthcare professional. So communication deficit, we go to a speech and language therapist. Headaches, you could refer to a neurologist, same with seizures, to look at epilepsy medication. Leg weakness would be to an occupational therapist, visual disorder to a neuro-ophthalmologist. But fatigue and future uncertainty, there's very little engagement from clinicians. And I think it's within the nature of a clinician that one of the reasons they go into medicine is that they want to help people and fix a problem. And with those two things, there isn't a prescription for dealing with future uncertainty. There isn't a prescription for fatigue. There are no pills for this. And equally, I don't think that our clinicians, as wonderful as they are equipped to actually deal with these more intangible things that impact on our lives. So they're really hard. So we know one of the reasons, the first things we tackled around quality of life is fatigue, because this came out of this piece of research as the #1 priority for people living with a brain tumour. Also, it was the top 10 of the James Lind Alliance Neuro-Oncology Priority Setting Partnership. Showed us that it was an absolute key priority for patients and their caregivers. And we also know from our evidence that between 40 to 80% of people living with a brain tumour will experience fatigue. It's very common after radiotherapy. Sometimes it goes away, more often than not it goes away, but for some people it never leaves them. So it is a very common problem. Can we go to the next slide, Jodie? Thank you. So let's talk about Andy. Andy's a patient we've been supporting. He's been diagnosed with a glioblastoma. He's a joiner. He's got 3 teenage children. And he's very much of the mind, you know, the generation where a proper man looks after his family, pays his own way, doesn't ask for help. He's been diagnosed with this brain tumour, and with this has come fatigue. So he's now feeling a little bit out of control. This is something that's happened to him over which he cannot control. He just can't control it. He has no ownership of this. So he's feeling overwhelmed. He gets angry and flashes off. What emotions does this generate? Well, it generates anxiety, stress. He's angry, so he feels guilt. So he tries to suppress the way he feels and feels that he needs to fix himself. He's always been able in the past to solve his problems for himself. He doesn't want to talk about his problems with anybody because that's not what a proper man does. So he becomes increasingly isolated. That manifests itself in his physical symptoms. So he has increased heart rate, his breathing is faster, his muscles are tense, which leads to poor sleep. And that in turn then leads to cognitive impairment. He's not able to concentrate as well as he used to. So what happens then is he keeps making more mistakes at work, but he's a man, so he needs to push through and man up. So he drinks lots of caffeine, takes lots of Red Bull, but then he makes more mistakes, which means more work. So he begins to miss shifts. And so you get this vicious cycle where Andy is becoming increasingly isolated, he's becoming increasingly fatigued, his ability to cope is being significantly reduced, and he's not able to engage with the people around him that could help him. Let's move to Beryl. So how has Beryl's fatigue impacted on her? So she's been diagnosed with a brain tumour, and she's very fearful. She lives alone. She's very fearful that she's going to end up in a home, and she's just overwhelmed. She doesn't have the anger that Andy has, but she is very sad and she's fearful for her future, and she's very lonely. Before she was diagnosed with a brain tumour, she had a good circle of friends. It wasn't a wide circle of friends, but they were people who were out there for her, who, you know, they would look after each other, and they had their fairly low-level, low-key activities that they did together as a group. So she becomes increasingly depressed. She has very low mood, very poor motivation, and absolutely no energy whatsoever, because she's dwelling on the time that she might end up in a home. The actions mean then that she begins to cancel trips to bingo, her coffee with her friends, because she wants to sit worrying instead. She doesn't draw the curtains back. She has further withdrawal, and people stop calling. So her isolation continues. And because she's feeling isolated and that there's nobody there to support her, she's wondering what's going to happen to her in the future. And she's worried that she's going to end up in this home. And therefore, if that's what's going to happen, her life won't be worth living. So again, you can see how Beryl now has got herself into this downward spiral. And it's about how can you break this pattern of behavior or this pattern of thinking, so that you're able to begin to unpick what's happening to you. But it's just some very simple things that you can do. So Jodie, I think, do we go to you now to start talking about the strategies?
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Okay, so in these next few slides, I'm just going to go through some ideas of strategies that can help you to manage your fatigue. You can find more details about these in our fatigue resource, which, as we said, is available to download from our website, or you can email us and we can post you a copy out as well. Okay, so essentially by analysing your fatigue and looking at it, you can find strategies to manage it. So we'll just make a start with the fatigue diary. So on the screen is an example of the fatigue diary, and again you can find a version to download of this on our website, or you can make your own version. You can do it on your phone or a notebook, however works best for you. So by doing a fatigue diary, it helped give you a clearer idea of actually what activities or what time of day where your fatigue is most severe. So as you can see in the example, you've got space to write the time, the activity, the scale from 0, which is no fatigue, to 10 to severe fatigue, and then what helps. So the idea, by looking at the activities and then the scale, you can then come up with a solution of how you might be able to change that. So in the example that we've got detailed here, the activity was showering, eating breakfast, and then this person had to go back to bed. So they rated that on a scale of 8. They said if I couldn't have got up at all, it would have been 10. So that's obviously very high on the fatigue scale. And what helped with that was accepting that I am fatigued, showering at a different point in the day, maybe before I go to bed. So you've got that analysis to try and help find a solution. So with the fatigue diary, it's not something that will happen quickly, take a couple of weeks or even a month to go through, you know, how you're feeling on each day after certain tasks. And this will help you get a more comprehensive view of your fatigue and how it can impact on your life. And also it's important to note that capture the good days and the bad days. So even if you do notice that you're feeling less fatigued on a certain day, write that down. What did you do on that day? What were the other factors about that day as well? And then that kind of gives you a more broader view of how fatigue is affecting you. So another strategy to look at is our sleep hygiene checklist. So if you are somebody who does have trouble sleeping, or maybe your bedtime routine has changed, maybe as a result after treatment or surgery or because of medication, and you feel that maybe sleep is the reason why your fatigue is particularly bad at the moment, then the sleep hygiene checklist would be another really good way to analyse this and to see what changes you might be able to make. So on the screen there's some examples of things that can influence your sleep positively. So what you can do is go through these and tick whether you do them usually, sometimes, or rarely. So do you have quite a robust sleep routine, or does it vary from night to night? So some of the examples are about going to bed at the same time, getting up at the same time, doing a relaxation exercise before going to bed, and also the temperature of the bedroom. So take a little look, print out a few copies, and maybe do this over, again, you know, a couple of weeks or a month. And then there's some other examples of how things that can influence your sleep negatively as well. And again, it's the same scale as usually, sometimes, rarely. So these could include things such as using electronic devices just before you go to sleep, eating a heavy meal or rich food prior to go to bed, telling yourself to go to sleep, which if you are somebody who does struggle to get to sleep, you may find yourself doing that as well. So these are, again, you know, things that you can rate on this scale. And if you do, if you have a partner or caregiver that you share a house with, complete it with them as well. They may notice things that you may not notice that you might do. So sit down and take some time to complete this together, along with the fatigue diary as well. Okay. So in this next bit, we've spoken about a couple of ways of analysing fatigue and how you can start to implement these changes. And I know that, you know, especially when living with a brain tumour diagnosis and all the other factors that come with it, making these changes or trying different things, it can feel quite daunting. It might feel like you need to make a big change to be able to have a big impact. So that's why we want to talk about marginal gains. So this came from, in 2010, the new General Manager and Performance Director for Great Britain's professional cycling team was told that he needed to make the British cycling team win the Tour de France, which was something that had never happened before. So his approach was simple. He believed in a concept that he referred to as the aggregation of marginal gains. So the idea behind marginal gains is to improve each area, so in the context of fatigue, by improving each area related to your sleep or fatigue by 1%, then the small gains will add up to a remarkable improvement. So you can start by optimising the obvious things, as we've mentioned, so habits before bedtime, times of day that you do certain activities, and then search for 1% improvements in tiny areas that are not so obvious or harder to find. So you'll find more ideas about this in the resource as well. Okay, so self-care. So in this section, we've highlighted a couple of aspects of self-care that we're going to talk about in particular. And then you can find more detail about these in the second half of the fatigue resource from page 22. So the first one we'll talk about is pacing. So the idea of pacing is that it is not about doing everything all at once. It is about prioritising tasks, planning activities, and taking a break before you need one. The idea of this is that it will enable you to self-manage better and build resilience, something that is depleted when you're fatigued. Boom and bust is a good way to describe how this feels when you don't pace. A lifestyle where we constantly push ourselves beyond our capacity and make little time to recover eventually takes a toll on our health, as our immune system in particular becomes depleted. If you are already challenged by a health condition, the contrast between your activity levels on good days compared with bad days can become more marked and more extreme, which then can create a vicious cycle. So with pacing, we mentioned about prioritising tasks and planning activities, and you can do this when you do your fatigue diary as well. So take a look at that when you are planning your day or a week, or if there is a particular activity or something that you have planned that you want to do, see how you can plan around that. So if you notice a pattern when you're doing your fatigue diary, is there a certain time of day that you feel kind of better consistently, or when you are doing certain things, will you have time during that to have that rest, to have that time where, you know, to avoid the boom and bust cycle that we spoke about. Okay, and then also another important one in terms of self-care is pleasurable activities. So often in the busyness of lives and when living with a brain tumour can come with other various challenges, maybe different hospital appointments or treatment, and just lots of other things going on, it's really easy to lose sight of pleasure. We can often feel very kind of taken up with trying to sort things, but it's important, and especially if fatigue is having a really big impact on your life, to try and find a balance. So with pleasurable activities, make a list of things that you like to do that make your heart sing. And doing these things, building them into your daily routine, can help give you energy. They don't have to be necessarily complicated. They can be really small things that can give you joy and can give you space and strength to carry on. So this could be something such as listening to a favourite piece of music, listening to birdsong, sitting in a nice area of your house or garden and enjoying a hot drink, doing a puzzle, a jigsaw, reading a book, anything at all. So in the resource there are lots of suggestions on page 46, and you can write your own. So get a nice notebook or maybe an area on your phone or tablet where you can write these things down. Write your list of things you enjoy. and then look at them often to remind yourself and promise to do one every day. Okay, so this is what I referred to earlier with the boom and bust. So the graph you can see on the screen is the cycle of overdoing and underdoing over time. So boom is the day when you can feel a bit more energetic. You might try to make up for lost time by packing in as much as you can. You might enjoy the sense of achievement so much that you become unaware or ignore the signs of feeling fatigued or increased pain. It is almost as if your mind takes over, racing ahead as your body is left behind. At this point, you are expecting too much of your body, which may not be able to deliver what you are asking of it. You may not have the ability your mind expects due to your health condition. Inevitably, if this cycle keeps up, you crash and need to rest to recover. This is the bust phase. Sadly, as you enter an extended spell of inactivity, you are further reinforcing the process of deconditioning, losing strength and stamina, and mentally it can become harder to recover. Over time, this can become a difficult downward spiral as you find that you need to rest more to achieve less. Just recognising this pattern of boom and bust will help you to break it and pace yourself a little differently. So some of the strategies that we've explored, and I'm going to go into a couple more as well, can help you to break this cycle. And just by acknowledging how you are feeling on certain days, that can help with the small step towards trying to avoid this boom and bust situation happening. Okay. So when managing fatigue, you've got the situation. So to make positive changes and positive impact, the situation is to adapt and compromise. In turn, this will trigger emotions of acceptance. Your thoughts are to examine, share, and challenge. And the symptoms of this will be that you'll feel relaxed, re-energized, and you'll do self-care. And the actions as a result of this are pacing, pacing, pacing. So we're just going to revisit a couple of examples that Helen spoke about earlier, and just to see how by making these shifts, making these changes, how their situations have changed. So we'll revisit Andy, who, as we said, 42, is a joiner with 3 children, and he has fatigue as a result of a brain tumour diagnosis. So Andy's thoughts are, the shift from the previous example, he's a proper man who manages his moods and takes care of his family. His emotions are that he parks his anger, accepts the new normal, finds new energy. As a result of this, he has started to relax. His blood pressure, heart rate, digestive functioning, and hormonal levels have returned to normal levels. The actions that have helped him with this is that he has spoken to his boss about his shift patterns. He's shared his worries, different to the example before where he tried to combat the fatigue with pushing through and drinking lots of caffeinated drinks. He has started pacing himself, taking time out, and riding his bike, so doing something that he enjoys. Okay. So although fatigue is still a part of his life, he has adapted his ways of thinking and his actions to help have more of a positive impact. Okay. So we'll revisit Beryl as well to see how by making some small changes, this has had a positive impact on her life as well. So Beryl's thoughts are that she can manage this with support. Her actions were to speak to a friend about how she was feeling, about fatigue and loneliness, seeking support for the fatigue, by speaking to her clinical team or through charity. So seeking support and seeing if she can get help around the house. She plans outings around how she is feeling through the help of analysing her fatigue. And if she isn't feeling up to going out with friends, she's tried to find new ways to stay connected with friends so she still has that social interaction. So again, her thoughts are she knows where to go for support. Her emotions are those of acceptance. She feels more content, more socially fulfilled, and more confident to share how she's feeling and to talk about the impact her fatigue is having. Her symptoms as a result of this are that her mood improves, she feels motivated, supported and better connected, and by getting that support and speaking to those around her, she has an outlet for her emotions. Okay, thank you. On to you, Helen.
Right, so these are things for you to consider. You know, we're aware that this is a very overloaded session, and normally we would take 3 hours to actually go through this. There'd be a lot of face-to-face interaction, a lot of one-to-one conversations, and some of you may or may not have the fatigue resource in front of you as you're watching this webinar. So there is a lot to take on board, but I would always come back to, what are you struggling with the most? What is it that your fatigue prevents you doing that you really want to be able to do? Is it that you don't have the energy when your child comes home at school to be present for them? Maybe you'd like to be a little bit more energetic when you're out with your friends, or you don't want to have to keep saying no to invitations. So you really need to have a motivating factor to want to make the changes that you could think about making. And the changes, you know, they're not the moon on the stick. Some of them are very, very simple, just things like changing your bed linen, for example. I can't sleep in poly cotton sheets. Maybe just so having cotton sheets would help. Maybe just turning the thermometer down in your bedroom. Those are the easy things. But really, for you to make sustainable change, you need to be motivated to want to do that. So think about how your life would be different if you weren't feeling fatigued. And then what you do is you think about, okay, so what are the 3 small changes that I'm going to make? It could even be 2. What are the 2 or 3 small changes that I'm going to make that will help me achieve the goals that I want to achieve? And then think about, who do you need to get on board with you to help you make these changes? Do you need to talk to your partner? Actually, I'm going to stop using my phone from 7 o'clock. I want you to make sure that I don't use my phone from 7 o'clock in the evening onwards. Or, you know, could you stop me drinking that litre of Coke at 10 o'clock at night? Because I think that's not helping me. So who's in your team who can support you with this? Is there any other additional help do you need? You might feel actually the first thing you need to do is to get some sort of clinical assessment. There's the brief fatigue inventory, which is a very simple assessment tool that is used to assess the severity of fatigue and the impact of fatigue on your daily functioning. It takes about 5 minutes to complete and can be done with a healthcare practitioner. But the brief fatigue inventory is at the back of the fatigue resource as well, so it gives you some idea of what it's like. There might be some blood tests that are needed to make sure that, you know, your iron levels are right and things like that. And where might you go to find the help you need? Is it in the circle around you, the friends and family around you, or do you need to reach out for some more clinical support? In which case, talk to your clinical team. So, Jodie, can we go to the last slide? Thank you. For those of you that are unfamiliar with our website, we have a lot of really useful resources up there, because, you know, our focus really is about ensuring and helping people to have their best possible day, no matter where they are on their pathway with their brain tumour. So you might find our know-hows. They're just very simple fact sheets that are produced by us, but with experts when needed. And also the involvement of patients and caregivers. So how to deal with uncertainty, how to deal with the overwhelm, exercise, mindfulness. We've also got areas on the website, acceptance too. We should really add that. I must add that to this slide. There's a whole area on acceptance and how you can use that. And by accepting things, it does free up your mind to be more opportunistic and see things, reframe things so they're more positive. But don't hesitate to get in touch with us. If you just email hello@brainstrust, it'll come through to me. If you want our fatigue resource, then just go on the website, you can order it, or just ping us an email, or even pick up the phone. And if you feel you need further support after this, actually, yeah, there are changes you want to make, but you're not sure how to go about them, then just email or again, pick up the phone and we can devote some time to talking with you about what these changes are and how you might best go about them. So I think that's all from me. Thank you for your time today. I hope you've found this webinar useful. Even if you just take one thing away from it, one small change that you're going to do. Jodie, is there anything you want to add?
I think that it's key to note that with the strategies, each one can work differently for different people. It's not one size fits all, but equally, if you've tried something that you found really helpful when managing your fatigue, and you'd like to share it, please do get in touch, because it's really, really helpful for us and for other people to see how what things can work and help. So please do drop us a line if there's anything you'd like to share.
Yeah, absolutely. We welcome your input. It's what keeps us grounded. It's what keeps our resources meaningful and relatable. And yeah, we're just there for you. So thank you for joining today.
Thank you very much.